Okay, so welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this talk on creativity and leadership. So my background is, well, my name is Peter Anderson, if you don't know already, and my background is in the performing arts. I now run a company called Anderson's Arena, and I go into companies and I help them by putting creativity as the main focus than the negative self-talk that can actually send a company down into the dumps. So that's what I do, and what I'd like to share with you today is my background in the creative arts, how that influences what I do in my leadership strategy today. So I was in dance, I was classically trained, and contemporary dance was my main source of performing arts skill set that I had. And I did that for 20 years. I trained at a school called Rambert, and then I went into Germany, France, Belgium, Wales, Iceland I retired in. And my work was toured around the world, and I also went from places from Ecuador over to Australia and China, and it was a very exciting life at that time. It came to a point, just like a football player, it's time to retire. And I was very lucky to be in Iceland at the time where you get funded to do an MA to help you going into your next career. I thought, wow, there's not many places on this planet where you get that kind of finance to step into the next chapter. So I decided to do one in leadership and change because I thought I was going to become a director of a dance company. So that's where I was going. But life came along and flipped upside down, and I ended up back in the UK. So I had this experience, and I had this education. I also had a background in NLP as well. And I've been using NLP, making it from sometimes a sitting writing format into a physical one. So I like to take it into workshops. And I saw some wonderful change works through this process.
NLP?
Neuro-linguistic programming. And that's really naughty for me to do, because I hate that when people just say these, I'm just like, what? So yes, so what that is change patterns of the mind. So where we can get stuck, metaphors can hold themselves as a truth, and then when we realize that we've actually constructed them and put another metaphor in its place, suddenly our behaviors change. It's a wonderful way of shifting unnecessary limiting belief systems. So I had all this that I was using together, and I ended up in education around the UK, upgrading people's GCSEs with a team of educators. But again, it was moving. I said I needed to stop moving, so I just needed a job, and I ended up in sales, which was very interesting. And I was at the front line. It was commission only, and it was selling furniture, and it was like do or die. That was the kind of atmosphere I was in. And it was in there that I saw that coming from a world of creativity, and then suddenly in a world where it was about target orientation, just hitting the targets. And again, sometimes there's a carrot-stick mentality. You get a bonus if you don't, then you get put on a certain fine type, or you get kicked out, or whatever it was. There was really this kind of animalistic way of leading. So that made me become more interested, and I decided to leave there and start my own company from there, and that's what I started to develop. And it came from when I was on the floor with some of the salespeople, and when all the banter had stopped, and it was mainly, at the time I started, it was mainly a kind of alpha male environment, and the language you were hearing, you were just like, I thought this was all over and done with, but it was still going quite strong. But when it was all quiet, and people weren't doing very well, and they were being teased and kind of, and they said, I'm having difficulty. I heard you do this mind thing stuff. Could you give me some help? So very quietly, then we'd work on the actual mindset. And through that, they would start to shift their targets. And I thought, why is anyone really taking this? I mean, this is, if we were in the performing arts, we wouldn't be focused on how many people we got in our seat all the time. We're concentrating on what it means to be a team, what it means to get the ideas, how to be innovative, that attracts people to us. So I thought, well, I'll test this out on a few businesses and see if they're interested. And people were interested in what it means to start being more creative in the environment of business. So that's what I'm going to share with you today, share my stories, if that's okay. Right. So once upon a time, so where shall I begin? One of the things I find very interesting with creativity is there can be a fear. When somebody says the word creativity, the fear can come up. And I might have a certain bias here, but I do push that a lot to the education system, where to be creative is seen as an extra. It's like a lot of kids, they have to do their work and then they get something that's creative. And that starts from the age of about 5 or 6. Before then, they're just painting, they're in the world, they're making all, but then they're sitting down and this law starts to come in. And then things are marked. And I saw this wonderful clip about somebody talking about when children have the word cat, and this is probably just a very stereotypical kind of example, but I think it's a good place just to put the mind on where the issues are. If they spell it C-A-T, they're given a tick. Correct, you spelled the word cat. If they spell it W-P-D, it's a wrong. If they spell it K-A-T, for some people it's a wrong. They get an X. But what that child was trying to do is trying to figure out the patterns of the sounds, what it knows with the sounds, getting the feeling out and putting it together, but that becomes an incorrect, becomes a wrong. So that kind of influence on the thought process starts to lead to the idea that when I attempt to be creative, it's not right. And this can go in, so you've got many places that you only do creativity outside what is really important. And then if we are creative outside the box, if we try to, I remember a friend of mine was having difficulty with algebra at that time, and I had a creative way of doing it. And I said, oh, I figured this out. He goes, yeah, show me. And he started getting the answers right. And he got everything wrong, although the answers were right, because he didn't do the system that he was told. Now, if the school system is, it needs to be the system, that's fine. But to give him an X on everything, when he went away to get information from somebody else, to improve his learning system that connected with his way of thinking, that he could get the right answer, he left school at the age of 16. So we've got to be so careful of what happens when we go, say the word creative, and people get this. So just out of curiosity, who in this room feels that they're creative? Okay, great. So we have no issues there. But what's very interesting is sometimes in a room, half the room will say, I feel creative, and the other half saying, no, not at all. So if you come across anybody that you feel, or it says that they're not creative, if you haven't done this before, it's very interesting to ask them the question, have you ever had resentment for somebody, for another human being? They go, yeah. Do you know those stories you make up where you're going to get the revenge, and how they're going to suffer, and how by the end of it you'll be standing on the top of them as they're just miserable, and all the evil deeds they did, they'll be plunged into a death of misery? Yeah, I've created that. That's creativity. So if we just swap that over to other areas of creativity, the way that brain works, you can start to feed it into something that's more beneficial to what we do. And I see it with young children when they're drawing. One of the killers of creativity is judgment. And I don't know if you've experienced this, or being quite competent with creativity, is when you judge yourself, that's it. It's done. There's a wonderful exercise, I'm going to talk a little about comedy improvisation later, where you pull these things out of the bag, and the thing you're training your mind to do is not go, because then you're taking the mind into the reasoning part of the brain. And when you're in the creative process, you want it open. So how do we get that also in businesses? How do we create that? And again, I've heard this idea that you can't just be creative in businesses because it's just what do you do with it? How does it work? It's just so. And this is what I find interesting with creativity and leadership and love. I think they've all got something in common. And what I find interesting is that you can't really put them in a wheelbarrow. If you were to define love, highly likely you're not really going to get a global definition of what love is. And we can see all the great poets and artists and everyone and musicians try to express what this thing that we have in ourselves as expression. Creativity, I find, is very similar. I have seen and read so many different examples of what people state as creativity. And one person says it this, and somebody says it's something else, and somebody says it's something else. And in leadership, the amount of leadership theory that is out there is mind-boggling. It just goes on and on and on and on and on, and trait theory and transformational and authentic and relationship, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think it just sums it up. It's, if you try to put it in a box, you're not going to get all the elements. So with leadership, my mentor said to me once, I said, I do this workshop where I get businesses in, and it's called exiting the comfort zone. So they sit down there, and the CEOs and they come into this because it's about stressors. It's about living with your stressors, and if you can live with your stress, then you can get to the end goal, which is normally the learning process. And if you avoid it, then you avoid getting to where you need to get to. So they've come to be stressed. They probably think it's going to be intellectual. And then we have a little chat about leadership, and then I say, just to let you know, you're going to be dancing and choreographing. And you see almost a sweat start to drip. You see the eyes, where's the exit, where's the door? The heart rate start to go. And one of the things is they say, well, I don't feel that I'm creative. And I come from the school that creativity can be taught. And I was in a conference where we got in a big discussion and argument, and it was very childish, but I believe it can be taught because I've seen it again and again. So I've got a group of people in a room that say they are not creative. The idea of dancing is terrifying them. But what they do is they take a chance to go for it. And then it's plotted out every step of how to gain confidence. And that sense of when you, it's gaining that trust in yourself and also a trust in me, that if I set something and they do it, so if I get 2 people that do this, and you get 3 people that do this, and you get 4 people that do this, and they do this and they stand forward and they go like that, they suddenly become choreographers. Really, really simple. And then they go, oh. And then you start to add, and before you know it, they're creating all sorts of stuff. And the people that once said, I'm not creative, they do a tableau and they're like, oh, can you turn that way? And, no, it's not quite right. But let's go in that. They're gone. They're in the zone. They're in the creative zone, and that beginning thought process has disappeared. So just being creative in a company, I think, can be dangerous if there's no processes in place. And also if we don't take the emotional side into the forefront of creativity. To be creative, you need to be vulnerable. And in a lot of business environments, if you show vulnerability, if you haven't created a culture of support, it's an opening for attack. So the culture needs to be in place that you can have a sense of safety and support in there. And I think it's the same thing with evidence. If you embrace this sense of process and creativity and you're seeing results, and it's not only that you're coming to work and you feel present, then the idea of knocking people up to get somewhere starts to fade away. And that's again, by promoting the positive, you can sometimes flood out the negative as a way of mindset within a group. But there needs to be some sort of evidence behind it that the investment of the vulnerability is going to have a certain payback as well. So one of the things that I found with processes in place is comedy improvisation. I studied in New York once. I had won this dance theatre competition. I had this money. And one of the things I used to do was comedy in dance. And that was my signature thing. That's how I got my work. And I thought, I'd never really studied it. I was just kind of doing it just naturally. So I thought, I'm going to go to America and I'm going to study stand-up comedy. So I went there and I went on this course. And it was horrendous. It was, I was in with another group. I was sitting at the back and they said you had your material ready. I had no material ready. And I was like, I've just flown all the way here, I'm going to do this. So I just made it up on the spot, and it went very well. So I just improvised. I didn't know what to do, I just improvised. And they were like, that looked like creative. So I just improvised it. And then I went and did the research, and then you got trained, and you basically had to look at everything, your weaknesses, everything that you thought was ugly or society gave judgment against, and you would take it and you would own it and you would feed it, and then you would, so if you were overweight, then people talked about being fat. If you were gay, then you talked about being gay, and it was just like you took all these things and you just hammered on the things that you already had enough pressure from the outside. I thought, why do I want to go home and write about the stuff that you're trying to shift away from? So for me, I didn't connect with it. And I said, I don't know what to do. And someone said, you know, you did that improvisation. I said, yeah. Do you know there's one of the world's top improvisational schools down the road? You should go and have a look. So I wandered down to the school, and I went to this improv, and there's a lot of TV celebrities there. I didn't know who they were, but I was told it was very exciting. But they come and do this because they don't just like doing the TV, they find it dry. This is where they came from. And I saw amazing stuff where I was laughing my head off, and they stepped on stage with nothing. I was like, that is exciting. How do you step into a space with nothing and produce a performance at the level of somebody that steps into space that's been working on it for 6 months? And then that was it, I was committed. So for the next 3 years, I went to America and I trained every summer in this style of improvisation. And why I find it so useful in business, and especially with creativity, is you have to train like crazy to allow the creativity to flow. I find with creativity, if you go, oh, I want to be creative, and there's no boundaries there, you're swimming around on sometimes nothing. But when you put a form in there, and you've got something to bounce off, then the creativity can come really alive. And that's what you're training. You're training these rules, these boundaries, so when you step into the space, when you step onto stage, everyone knows what their boundaries are. And you have to be so strict with them, and then the creativity comes out. And what I found so interesting about it is that the process that you're creating is bigger than the individuals. It's the individuals putting it into the space that creates the material. And sometimes in a business environment, if you can get that sense that people understand that by putting the ideas in and allowing, sometimes following the idea, it can come into something that is above what you originally thought it was going to be. Now I find this very interesting because we're coming to a world where technology is so advanced and innovation is happening at so many levels. This idea of managing a process that is doing well for you and not allowing yourself to be in a creative growth mindset culture in your company, you could easily be left behind. Education and information is everywhere now. The challenge sometimes we have is how do we take this information, find the patterns, and create something that is going to be viable for the company and the purpose of what the organisation wants to move forward with. And this is where things like improvisation map into this very nicely. The sense of stepping into the unknown and creating a format to deal with the unknown, for me, is very similar to where we are at the moment. With AI coming up, we have no idea what this is doing. Social media in the last 10 years is booming, and marketing is shifting, and customer has changed, and all this is shifting. What does it mean to step into this with the tools to go, let's go? And that is where creativity, I feel, is one of the most important skills to have in leadership at the moment, because it is so volatile, the environment that we're living in. And that's exciting. Because when you let go and you listen and you are allowed to be persuaded with what's going on and form it into something, it can become really exciting. So with creativity, there's a sense of emotional resilience also that is needed. Because there is a vulnerability in there, And because a lot of the time we do have this negative internal voice that goes on. And when I'm working with a group and we're doing a little cultural shift, one of the things we have to look at is what the internal voice is doing. Because one of the things it can do is it can stand up and say no very quickly. Not doing that. Ooh, that's different, that's unknown, I don't understand, no, no, and all these blocks come in. And one of the little gems of creative thinking is the yes and philosophy. And this is very useful for generating ideas. Some people use yes but, which is basically agreeing and then hitting somebody over the head with a baseball bat, emotionally. Because you're vulnerable, you think somebody's with you, and they say, no, that idea is actually useless and mine is so much better. So we've got to be very careful our language, that our language is clean when we're in a creative process. Because we can detect it. We've had enough experience in our life where people have stopped things. And if we detect somebody putting a boundary in, those bricks will start to build up. Yeah, everything's fine, and then I'll only give as much that is needed for this meeting or workshop, or just that much. I'm not going to open up because I don't trust everybody that's in this room. So to become emotionally resilient, I used to do a talk with creativity, which was based on the classical form of emotions. The research looked really good. The information I've been passed on looked really good, so I thought I can share this with people. It seems like it's got good substance. And it's the idea that emotions are built around the structure of the brain for the neuroscience. So you have the reptilian part of the brain, and then you have the hippocampus part of the brain, which is seen as the monkey brain, and then you have the neocortex that goes along the side. And the emotion is here, and the reasoning is here, and then the activation of the reptilian place is here. I thought that sounds great. Until I came across this lady, if I get her name right, I think it's Lisa Feldman Barrett, something along those lines like that. But she says it's a load of nonsense. And emotions are an illusion. I'm like, oh dear. Oops, can I take that information back? If this is true, and I remember I talked to a neuroscientist because I was fumbling with all this stuff, and he said just stop talking about neuroscience as a hard science. It's very new, we don't really know what's going on at the moment. The only hard science that we have is the brain learns. Outside that, a lot of it is philosophy that's going into it. So just be careful when you're hearing all this. And I was like, okay. And then I've heard this one here. So I'm just taking this with a pinch of salt at the moment, but I like it because it works with creative thinking. And what I like about it is that she's saying the brain predicts. It's a predicting machine. And the body has sensations. So and the same sensation for fear and excitement has the same reaction in the body. And then we construct the meaning behind that within our environment where we are. So if I'm going to go on a date with somebody I'm hoping to get to know a bit more, I might get a pull in my stomach. I go, oh, I'm excited about the date. If I'm going through a dark alley in a really dodgy part of London and I get that feeling, I'm like, oh, this is dangerous. I'm a little bit afraid. But it could be exactly the same physical sensation, but I've mapped it out with my construct of what my emotional state is. So I find that very interesting. So if I'm having maybe a disagreement with my significant other, and before I thought it was just a natural accent, and then I was naturally, and there were these just childish monkeys were just like yapping at each other, and then to go, hold on a second, she's making a prediction of the situation, constructing it with information from the past, and making a conclusion, and arguing into that prediction. And I'm doing exactly the same. Ooh. So of course it's hyper fast, and our archetypes are very strong through thousands and thousands of years. But just to have that moment to go, what is my responsibility then to my emotional state? what is going on in my body and how am I translating it? And if the brain learns, that's the only hard science I'm allowed to quote, and it learns that I'm constructing my emotions, will that give me more space in my reaction time eventually, as I start to change the patterns of my brain? So when somebody is in a situation and somebody has told them that their idea is not good, and you think, hold on, they've constructed that. And I'm now constructing a reaction to that. Hold up a second, I'm not going to put my bricks up. Let's just take this down a second. How real is this? And what do I really want to do? Do I want to be vulnerable and put my creative side forward so I can build on it? And if it's not, then I stand up for it and just start to say we need to change our language, and then I start to lead within the environment, the group that I'm in. Instead of just reacting, what I think is just biological, emotional state. So taking that on board, for me, going into creativity gives more space to be vulnerable. Because as soon as we put in fear, or we can start, if this construction theory is correct, it's only fear because I've built it up as fear. So as we start to, as science is progressing, and our businesses are progressing, the hierarchy system is starting to be challenged at the moment, which is exciting at the same time, and creative, more of taking the idea of an organism, how a cell looks after itself without a boss, is how some companies are starting to activate, and these are starting to come alive. So there's different systems that are, at this present moment, are changing right now. And that's why I also support creative thinking, because we have to be listening, we have to be aware of what's going on. Ideas are everywhere. And the way we capture those ideas is, I remember hearing this term, is to listen for the ideas. Because when we listen, our senses open. And there's a difference of there can be refined creativity where you're going in and working in an area, and then there's open, where the mind opens and the ideas can then just drop in. And unfortunately, because we're so busy in our work life, busy, we don't get that time to open the mind. And that space, that sometimes that need to stop to create the space so that the ideas can actually go in. And if we start to, as leaders, wherever we're working in small groups or organizations, start to create those spaces, and some companies are doing that at the moment, that's part of their mission statement, is create those spaces for innovation. It doesn't always need to be the top tech companies that can do it. It can be from small community centers to, if we just create that space so we don't just end up there, and then there's too much noise, we can't actually hear the signal of what's going on. So this I find very interesting also, because talking about hierarchy system and categorization, my mentor once told me, I'm doing dance, I'm doing leadership and creativity, and I want to do something with dance and leadership and creativity. He said, oh, let's just stop for a second. I said, what, this is really exciting. Yeah, it's very exciting, but there's something in your language already which is actually going against what you want to do. So, what do you mean by that? He said, you look at someone like the quantum mechanics and the micro world that they're working in. It's sometimes very different to the world that we're working in. But they found out if you observe something, sometimes everything else disappears. From that observation, the other stuff that supports it is gone. And so we've got to be careful with leadership, that it's the same. It's a human dynamic process, and as soon as we start to label it, we miss all the stuff that's going on. And in the silence of leadership is a lot of activity, and we can't measure that silence. And that silence can be in relationships, that not only for the individual, but the relationships that they're attached to. So there's a whole field moving. And as soon as we try to get a behavior of a leader, we've lost all that. So he said, if you want to take something that represents what you believe is dance, We said, just change the word to dancing, because that's in motion. And leadership is in motion. And it constantly shifts within its environment, it changes within its environment. And I find that very, very, it kind of shifted my process of what I was thinking, because he said, do you know what leadership all has in common? If you go down, it's all dead. It's all measured from a time that has gone. Nearly everything, I don't know, I haven't studied every single element of leadership, but he said that was what you'll find, as that company is successful, a leader is successful, and they go in and they figure out why they're successful. And in that, you're only going to have to pick up some of the pieces, because what is alive is still going on in the process, and that can't be held. So all this I find so interesting, because it's expanding it's constantly expanding this sense of this bounded beings, that we're just a cylinder walking around. I am the leader, and then somebody else is the leader, or somebody's the follower, and there's these individuals. But this idea that it expands through its relations and the interaction makes it so much more alive. And a little bit like the improvisation, stepping into space, there's a sense that you step in knowing that you've put a process in place that supports you. And just little things like the yes and is tiny. But when somebody says to you, well, you say an idea, and you get to know, you go yes. Yeah, you don't need to say yes, but you understand. You almost like you get into their home and you look around and go, oh, is this here? Is this chair here? And I go, yeah, that's it. And you understand where they're coming from. And you step back and you say, I'm going to add to that. I'm going to add to that. And you say, what do you think about this? And the person takes it and goes, yeah, I'll give this a go. And they put it in. And that process, just from a yes and, creates a sense of connection. Now, it's important to remember that all creative ideas are not going to be useful. And it's to understand where that process is. So if you decide to be creative, then you engage in the creative laws. And those are a safe space, take away the judgment, open up the mind, build on other people's ideas, let go of your own ideas. So you have to sacrifice sometimes what you're really holding on to, because it's going in a different direction. If you hold on to it, I've got a great idea, and it's going somewhere else, it's only going to cause conflict and pain. Let it go. Another time you can build on that, just put it aside. So you build, and then when it's ripe, then you can stand back and go, okay, now we're going to analyze. Is there a market potential, is there a need, or whatever the process that you want to put in, you analyze, you can pull it to pieces, but it's very different when somebody goes, yeah, there it is. Okay, do your best, let's see if it's alive. But if you start to do it in the moment where it's evolving and it hasn't been clear, and people are chopping away, when you haven't put language onto that, what that sensation is, it's abstract. It's very different having a team around you going, let's find this together. What are you saying? What is this? And then it bounces and it grows and it becomes something. So allow the creativity to have its place, allow the analytical side to have its place as well. And then if people make a decision, it's not for us now, just put it in the bank. Maybe later on it's not the right timing. And sometimes there's this saying about like YouTube, there's loads of companies before YouTube that were doing exactly what YouTube did, but the streaming wasn't right, or the technical this or that wasn't right, or people didn't understand enough, and YouTube came just at that right time, and that's it, it went off. So our timing, it's almost like comedy. If you don't get your timing right, it's all falling apart. And I think that's the way with creativity, and when you put something out there, when you got it, your timing also is a very big indicator of its success as well, when it's actually going to become something. So they're very different, the ability to give and create, and then what the market says and how you want to analyze it and put it together. Keep them separate. And then they can support each other in their own, almost like pillars supporting the house. They look after each other in their own sense. So there's a real sense with, you hear again and again that depression is getting more increased for the young people at the moment. We're meant to be the least happiness is its lowest state it's ever been in, but we're the richest we've ever. We hear these kind of quotes again and again. And when I worked, how are we doing for time? I don't know how many.
Almost 35.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share this one little story. So, I used to work sometimes with young boys from who have struggling in schools. So I'd go into their school and I'd say, so who wants to do my workshop? I'm going to be doing a dance workshop. What? I'm going to do my dance workshop? And they'll go, I said, why is that? And they go, well, it's girly. I was like, really? Oh, okay. So then I go into that mindset. It just so happened at this time, in the company that I was, is that a lot of us had done martial arts, a lot of the guys had done martial arts. Just so happened, it's not always the case, but it was just fun, I could work with it. So I go, oh, okay. So just to let you know, this guy here is a karate champion. This guy funded his way through dance school for doing the doors in nightclubs. And I'm a black belt in combat jiu-jitsu. Which one of us are good? And you can hear the thing go. And just by the way, I'll just let you know that in my company, every single one of our girls could out-press up any guy in this room. Just to let you know. And you could just see that whatever that was starts to go, that's what I'm holding on to, and it's disappearing. And then I start to talk about creativity. And I talked about, I understand that you've got something, and you aren't able to express it at the moment. You come to my workshop, I will take you through that process. And you will understand, you can use this in business, you can use this in your music, you can use it whatever you want. You will have a gift to come here. And I just want to let you know that girls like guys who can dance. And the girls in the room go, yeah, go on, do it. And they're like, all right, I'll go. And they come and they're brilliant. They come on stage, and this is the sadness of it, is these young guys are suffering and getting angry and all sorts of stuff, and they're told they're stupid and all that, and then they get on that stage and they work like crazy, they work in teams, they get creative, they do all sorts of stuff. They do a performance where they stand, and this one teacher came to me with tears in his eyes and said, you have no idea who you got on that stage. And for me, that is the basis of creativity. It's sucked out of our culture, and there's a sadness that is coming from that. I'm biased, of course, but I feel there's a sadness because there's not enough space for the creativity to come in. Because there's one thing that really heals is when you work with somebody and they give you something creative and you give something back. And that circle, that bonding, creates a sense of being here right now. And if we have a problem with absenteeism in our workplace, that people are dead in their space at work, and we're afraid of bringing creativity, we don't understand how to bring creativity into organisation. I think it's just looking at the processes from places from the arts and all sorts of creative areas that can help that process in place, so that companies that would like to be creative but not quite sure how the process works can start to get their employees getting a sense of meaning when they come to work. So that's how I feel that creativity and leadership can really help in our organisational structure today. Thank you very much. Can't help myself. Do you have any questions at all?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what the question is, but as you said, there's lots of leadership books, research and everything out there. What would your tip be? I really struggle in many ways. I think, oh, I've got lots of good leadership skills and everything. I'm not particularly well organised, and I always kind of beat myself up about that. I think you're really good at like the caring side of it, but you're not a good leader because your lack of organisation is letting people down.
Okay.
And I read lots of different leadership books, and I understand lots of
And are you letting people down?
I don't know. I sometimes think, well, actually, no, you're a better leader than the people that are really organised but don't actually give a damn.
But how do you know if you're letting people down?
I don't know.
What evidence have you got that you're letting them down?
None.
Right, okay. So this is what exactly what the negative mindset does. It's a real great convincer.
Yeah.
It's
like, completely.
Yeah. So I'm really good at this here, but here I'm really letting people down.
a thought of what my question actually
Yeah.
is. So would you say, because from listening to you, I'm just, this is amazing. Would you say just go with it, just go with the stuff that I know I'm
Absolutely.
really good at?
Because I think it's a lie that somewhere along you'll find a point where you made that decision and it's not true. And what happens is it's feeding, and the more you feed it, it's getting power from a lie. And that means the good stuff that you're doing is being inhibited from letting all these invisible people down. And as soon as that space then to work on what you're good at, that's juicy.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any questions?
Question, but it's made me think a bit differently about my daughter's 5.
Yes, yeah.
I've got a 5 and a 2, and I can see that, if you like, naturally the 2-year-old is more creative, and the 5-year-old who's in school is struggling sometimes with learning to read and things, and actually I need to get her to open up maybe about a creative way of working so that she feels more comfortable in.
Yes. Now I'm going to share something with you because this is a very passionate. I'm dyslexic, so I suffered a lot in the education system, and then at MA level I was an A student. Of course I've got computers now. I didn't have computers when I was doing it originally, but I have computers, so I've got spell checking, I've got Google, so I don't have libraries. Libraries used to, I hated libraries because I didn't even know what the word started with before, but now Google can work the speed that my mind wants to work. One of the things I find is that if there is a struggle with reading and writing, that the identity is the part that is the most sensitive. So we all need to struggle to grow. It's a part of the process. And this just happened with a child I was speaking to the other day. And we use a bicycle as a metaphor because he likes to ride his bicycle. And that we looked at how many times he fell over and bruised himself, and now he loves riding. And that's this is, and the wonderful thing I think with kids is stories are amazing. Structuring the stories around where their goal is, so where they want to achieve, and struggle, achieve, struggle, and it's patterned forward stories, colourful stories of their experiences. It helps with the struggle that they're going through. But like you said, the other thing is, if there is a creative yearning, that's fed as well. So there's an identity that's being, it almost cushions the knocks. So that's where my thing was, is I was good at sports, I was good at art, I was good at performing, and I was lucky to be in a place where that was really encouraged. So the knocks that I got from, this isn't working, that's not working, the frustrating with maths, and I had something that was bouncing against. So there was a resilience, the creativity gave a resilience against the school system that I wasn't doing so well in. So I don't know if that's answered your question, or do I need to be a little bit more, I found myself waffle a little bit. Yeah, exactly. That's what not to do with creativity. Yeah, I got labelled with ADD at one point, which is great. I love it. But it does mean sometimes I just go, whoo, off I go. Yeah.
I was going to ask, how do you manage a creative? Because they can sometimes be. I've got a daughter who's very creative, and it's a bit of a struggle sometimes in getting her to do what she has to do.
Yeah.
Because all she cares about is the creative.
Yeah. I think if we lived on Dance World, she wouldn't have an issue at all.
She wouldn't. You're absolutely right.
Unfortunately, she lives on World.
Yeah.
And for me, there's this stress about achieving. I'm going to say something that's completely, probably not right, but I'm going to just say it anyway. It's going to be okay. It really is going to be okay. And she will find her way, and the things may go right. What is happening, if I look where I am, when I was an age and I was struggling, I had no idea there was going to be a thing called the internet, and that the Grammarly can come in and then look after and that I can actually do an education and not ask a single person for help, and still get my qualification. Wouldn't have been able to do that before. Technology is soon ahead, so I think she's going to be absolutely okay. I really do. I think I believe. Well, I believe storytelling was an amazing part of our way of exchanging knowledge, and for 100,000 odd years or whatever. In the last, what is it, 100 years or something, words come in as a general thing, and our way of learning communication. We've been learning for thousands of years without words. And then things like YouTube and the internet are bringing emotion and story back into education. For me to do my MA, I wasn't always reading the books. I was looking at the lectures of the authors, and I was getting the same information that I needed from the lectures. I couldn't do that before. So I really think that our learning will expand to go back to a place where it's more emotionally based, it's more creative, and we've got the technology to do it. Kindergarten, I think, is fantastic education of using elements to count and learn with place, and then suddenly stop. And we haven't had the technology, I think, to take our advancement, our industrial advancement to that level, but now we have. So that means we could really open the door and allow everybody who's struggling in school today to get a sense that they can have bespoke learning so they can get to where they want to get to. That's my optimistic look at it.
But then what you're also saying is it's not just the tools that might have not existed until now that might help people, but it's the burden of the self-image that a lot of the time is limiting. So regardless of what tools are going to come from now, it's about helping everybody to overcome the limitations that they put on themselves. But it was interesting, the part of your talk where you're talking about the improv, for me, you know, on the one hand you're saying boundaries are bad, you know, you shouldn't try to limit yourself. But at the same time, if you don't train yourself and give yourself some boundaries like, okay, I'm going to try and do improv work to help me be creative in something else, unless you create those boundaries, then... So that's the for paradox. Me that was interesting that on the one hand boundaries bad, but also boundaries necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? So that was...
And that's what I love, the paradox of it. And I go back to education, we don't really do paradox training as an education. And I was told that in France they do a lot more of paradox training as an education. So I don't know if that's true, I was told that, but I just find that interesting that I've been brought up where paradox, it's either good or bad, and it can actually be right in the middle. So and that's what I find wonderful. Thanks for that. It's those and I'll look back on this talk in hopefully 10 years and go, what a load of nonsense. Thank you very much.